All right, so welcome to Research Expert Solutions. This is our first lesson in the Social Scientific Research course. So, my name is Fitzgerald Whitaker, and I'm your tutor for this particular course. All right, so we can move on to the first slide. So the first slide here just talks about the discussions that we're going to have in this particular lesson. So the first thing that you see, obviously, is the outline of the course, and the second part is basically an overview of business research, and the third part we talk about the business structure of a business research paper, and we talk about topic selection criteria, background of the study, statement of the research problem, and significance of the research. Okay, so with regards to the course outline, basically this course is going to comprise of two parts, and the first part is called research methods, or rather it's the research methods, and the second part is basically data analysis, also called part B, right? So you see the first part being research methods will basically comprise of discussions pertaining to business research, economic research, and market research. So these are just different kinds of research that can be done in the dimensions of business or research or economic research. Um, if you see, business research is basically that kind of research that involves disciplines such as purchasing and supply, business administration, accounting, as well as other kinds of business studies such as public administration, right? So, but for economic research, we're basically going to focus on how we apply research methods in the discipline of economics, or rather, looking at how individuals come up with certain methods to actually analyze economic phenomena. However, when we're talking about market research is not very different from business research, but it has been presented in a form independent from business research. Reason being is because the idea behind coming up with research problems and how the research objectives, the principles that guide an individual on how to actually come up with research objectives are kind of different from the way we actually think about how to structure our research objectives in business research and how to really come up with a problem, right? So the major distinction between these kinds of different research is basically the kind of information that they seek to arrive at, and basically also to some extent the kind of information that they deal with, right? So on part B, we're more interested in the data analysis behind the research methods that we have proposed in part A. So for example, in part B, you notice that we will be talking about statistical analysis as well as econometric analysis and thematic analysis. So statistical analysis just involves using statistical tools such as descriptive statistics, frequencies, cross tabulations to analyze data. Now, data may have been collected through different kinds of data collection instruments such as questionnaires or maybe online surveys and things like that. So, but what is important here is to understand how to use statistical tools that I mentioned earlier, including other sophisticated kind of statistical tools, such as maybe you're running a regression that is a logit regression, or maybe a probit regression, or a multinomial logistic regression, and things like that. So on the other hand, we may be looking at econometric analysis, and in econometric analysis, we are interested in the application of mathematics and economic theory to actually analyze economic data, as well as applying these statistical tools to the analysis in order to come up with certain recommendations based on the results obtained for policy implementations. So basically, econometric analysis just involves the combination of mathematics, statistics, and economic theory in order to actually come up with relevant recommendations based on results obtained to foster policy implementation that might be of relevance to the nation, government, or maybe other stakeholders in the country. On the other hand, we may be looking at thematic analysis, but I mean, thematic analysis just kind of that type of analysis that deals with qualitative information, where you are trying to analyze the similarities in the patterns of data and trying to come up with ways of actually presenting that data in a manner that is easy for people to understand. So that's thematic analysis. However, we can go much deeper into that as we begin looking at it in part B of this particular course. All right, so moving on to the next slide, we are looking at an overview of business research. Okay, so basically, when we look at business research, like I earlier said, business research actually just involves that kind of research in the discipline of business administration, purchasing and supply, maybe political science, as well as other kinds of disciplines such as accounting that belong to the spectrum of business. So, when we look at business research, the first thing that we want to understand is how to select a topic for your study, right? Now, one thing that we need to consider is the purpose of the research topic that you want to select. For example, is it for academic purposes, or rather it's for business purposes? And depending on which dimension you pick the topic for, that will determine the direction you should take in determining the kind of problem of interest in the study. For example, if you decide that you come up with a topic that is in the business dimension and basically for business purposes, then you should look for a problem that solves a business problem, right? So if you decide to go for a topic because you are doing it for academic purposes, say maybe you are a student at a particular university, then the major key in coming up with the problem should be linked to trying to solve an academic problem. Now, this brings to mind the question of what is an academic research problem and how is it different from a business research problem. Let's suppose you are doing this particular research for academic purposes. You are a university student and you are trying to come up with a research topic that identifies a particular research problem in this particular business research related task. So the first thing that you need to understand is that when you are doing research for academic purposes as a student at a particular university, academicians are interested in literature. Okay, they are interested in research that has capacity to contribute to the contemporary wide body of knowledge pertaining to the research or topic that you have selected. So that is what academicians are interested in. Now, that kind of perspective is highly linked to theoretical literature. So basically, coming up with an academic research problem requires that you are aware of what theory suggests, or let's say what is widely accepted on a conventional perspective, and trying to link certain theories that have been accepted pertaining to certain relationships you are looking at, or maybe variables of interest, and trying to see whether the relation between the variables of interest in the research topic are consistent or not consistent with what theory actually suggests. Yeah, so if the variables of interest, say your dependent and your independent variables, are consistent with what theory suggests, then it means that it is difficult to identify a theoretical problem, right? So, usually, what academicians are also interested in is whether the kind of research you are trying to do is actually going to add on to existing empirical literature. So, for example, of course, the relationships may be consistent with theory, but maybe not perfectly explaining what theory suggests. So, meaning, depending on the kind of methodology you may use for this particular research, the way you actually structure your methodology, which may vary from what other researchers have done, uh, it may yield some new information regarding explanations of the particular relationships that you are looking at. So, in this regard, it implies that value addition or contribution from your research to the wide body of knowledge, or rather contemporary literature on the subject that you are looking at, can be derived it can be derived from the methodology that you propose. So, meaning, if you want to add value to what already exists, then you should come in with a new methodology. Say, maybe if other studies used particular variables to explain a particular dependent variable of interest, then you should come in with a new methodology explaining the same dependent variable with maybe variables that have been used in literature, but with an additional new variable to the methodology that enhances the explanation of how a particular dependent variable varies with respect to the new variable and odd variables known to be associated with that particular dependent variable. However, the addition of variables to a particular methodology to explain a dependent variable of interest depends on whether you have relevant information to support the inclusion of that particular variable in the methodology or regression or particular way of analyzing that new variable along with other known variables to explain your dependent variable. So, meaning, if you come in with an argument that, well, uh, despite majority of researchers around the world doing research on this particular subject, most of these results derived from these different researchers' studies have been limited because they have not been able to explain this and that because of this and that. And therefore, with this particular methodology that I introduced in this study, it is going to help us account for certain things that other researchers did not account for, right? But, well, what is important is to ensure that you are not going to mention that you're coming in with a new methodology, because you mainly focus on emphasizing that you are basically going to include a certain variable that might add value to how we explain that particular dependent variable. The emphasis should not be on the methodology itself, because when you say methodology, the term methodology is too broad, because it does not just involve the inclusion of that particular variable, right? Because methodology tells us the research approach you're taking, how you're collecting data, the ethical principles that you had followed in order to do the research in a manner that is considered uh, 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 appropriate, and something that is not harmful to others, because we do not want to conduct research in a manner that is harmful to others, right? Or maybe conducting research in a way that exposes sensitive information that might lead the researcher to be sued. So there are certain ethical principles that we need to follow in research. Okay, so now the idea is, sometimes you may not really find a problem based on theory, but because research is about finding new ways of actually improving the way we predict things and the way we explain things, it means that contribution to the wide body of knowledge is not limited to actually fighting against the theories that exist, right? Of course, there are some studies that have been proposed and have been successful in actually changing the existing theory. But majority of study now, where we change theory, this is where you have people such as Nobel Prize winners who actually usually change the perspective in the dimension of certain fields of study, right? But mostly, if you are a university student, it is not expected that you are probably going to produce something that challenges theory to be changed in the discipline. However, what we usually expect, or what most people usually expect, is if you're a student, all you're going to do is bring in a new methodology on how to explain the theory that already exists or is known to be existing. So this is where people come in with new methodologies with different variables to explain the same particular dependent variable in the study, with maybe an addition of other variables already used by other researchers. So yeah, that being said, in summary, when we're coming up with an academic research problem, we're trying to see whether the relationships we're dealing with are consistent with theory, or if they are not consistent with theory. But I mean, the goal is there is a problem given that the variables of interest are not consistent with what theory suggests. On the other hand, they might be consistent with what theory suggests, but maybe you have identified that based on the empirical literature that you have reviewed, most researchers overlooked a particular variable that you feel might have robust explanations on that particular dependent variable of interest, and may enhance the results with regards to how we understand that particular variable. So that can also be something that you can include in your academic research problem, to say that, well, majority of these researchers have overlooked an important variable that this research intends to account for by doing this and that and that, depending on how you have planned to actually include that particular variable, measure it, as well as arrive at the findings that will help you achieve your objectives. Okay, now let us suppose that you pick a topic for business purposes. That implies that you are basically looking for a solution to a business research problem. So now, this also brings a question to mind, that how do we come up with a business research problem? So how we come up with a business research problem is basically the same way we come up with an academic research problem, except that, of course, there are a few differences which will be discussed uh, eh, very soon. So, first and foremost, of course, we want to look at the theoretical literature itself. What does theory say about the variables of interest that you're looking at in this particular business motivated research topic? Uh, and then what you realize is that, okay, if the variables are consistent with theory, then of course you don't have a problem there. You don't have a theoretical problem there. However, if the variables of interest are inconsistent with what theory suggests, then you can say that, okay, we have a problem there. However, now let's assume a situation where the variables of interest, of course, they are consistent with theory, but you want to come up with an argument of how to make the research better, right? So this is where the difference between a business research motivated problem becomes quite different in terms of how we arrive at it in comparison to an academic research problem. In that, when you're doing research for business purposes, meaning you are practically doing a particular research topic for the benefit of your organization. However, if you are doing research for academic purposes, then it is expected that you are basically a university student who wants to graduate from that particular university. So, but what is expected is that your research should contribute to either theoretical literature or empirical literature. So, you see, the distinction is that a business motivated research aims at finding a problem that the business is facing and coming up with recommendations based on the results obtained from the research that can improve the way that particular organization is maybe functioning. However, for you as a student, you are looking at graduating, or maybe you are just an independent researcher who publishes research in particular scientific journals, and say you want to publish research in a particular scientific journal. So, what happens is that researchers, independent researchers, or maybe a research institute that is trying to publish a paper in a particular research journal is not very different from a university student or any person who's trying to do research for academic purposes when arriving at the problem. The things that people are looking for in academia are things that will contribute to theoretical literature or empirical literature. And so the way it is that the problem with looking at these kinds of views and trying to unify them with how people think in the business perspective is that they sometimes deviate from each other. Like, for example, when you're looking at businesses are not interested in contributing stuff really to empirical literature. What businesses are interested in is conducting research that can help them improve their processes in their organization. So most of them are more likely to actually conduct research the same way it is always conducted, just to get results that they want. They don't really focus on trying to come up with something new that can actually contribute to empirical literature or maybe some theory, right? So businesses mainly focus on uh, what is expected, meaning they mainly focus on theory. What is expected, given that they increased the way they actually offer their services to a level that maybe enhances customer satisfaction. They would expect that they will have more customers because probably people will start delivering information that they are providing good customer care services that have increased satisfaction. So, on the other hand, we can say maybe they increase the number of, or maybe they increase the amount of investments in advertising their products and services. So they would expect that they should have more customers, and if they don't, then they would want to actually maybe conduct research to find out what is it that they are doing wrong with regards to maybe marketing their products, or maybe just their products that they provide, or maybe their services. What could be wrong that customers are not really interested in? um, so that kind of information, they wouldn't really consider coming up with a problem that looks into solving a problem based on what other researchers have found, but rather they would focus on a problem that is highly linked to their organization objectives, which may vary in comparison to objectives in other organizations, or maybe that those objectives are not even uh, uh, objectives that academicians are interested in. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say here is that if you are doing research for your company, or maybe for a particular business or any other kind of organization, not necessarily because you want to submit your work to academicians to review it, then there is a high likelihood that the kind of problem or you present in that particular research is not a problem that is highly motivated in contributing to empirical literature or the wide body of knowledge, but rather it is a problem that is identified in your organization that requires research in order to find solutions to that particular problem and improve the overall performance of that particular organization. So, if you're a university student, it's different. If you're a university student, they're teaching you how to criticize what is existing in literature, as well as come up with new ways of doing things in order to actually foster innovation, research, and development. So that kind of approach is a bit different in perspective with regards to the approach applied when you are doing research for an organization. So now this information is very important. As you see, this course is not only for university students, it's also a course meant for people in business, and that is why you are being taught these two different perspectives when you are actually coming up with either a business research problem or an academic research problem. So this information is quite important and needs to be understood in order to know and determine what you should do depending on the direction you are taking. All right, I think we've talked about a lot of things that are important. Now, it should be noted that whenever you pick a topic, either in the business dimension or for business purposes, or rather for academic purposes, it can either be a case study or a general study. When it's a case study, then you're basically focusing on a particular organization or a group of people, a particular group of people, say SMEs, right? Or maybe farmers, or maybe you may be looking at a particular entity. It doesn't matter. What is important is you're looking at a particular group or, or organization. So that's a case study, right? And then it can also be a general study where you're looking at different kinds of uh, organizations, maybe in the same sector, right? Or different kinds of people in business. So they may be doing different kinds of businesses, right? So that one is a general study because I mean it has no specific focus, but well, the most important thing is that you are selecting a bunch of things in a study that can be classified under one particular thing. Like for example, a particular sector, or you're looking at farmers in the agriculture sector uh, doing different kinds of agricultural activities. So that one would be a general study because you are not specifying the exact agricultural farmers. Yeah, so that would be a case study because you're not limiting your focus to a particular group or a particular entity. You're basically looking at uh, organizations, different kinds of organizations, maybe in a particular sector, or you're looking at different kinds of people doing different activities in a particular sector. Okay, so the other important part is the part for research objectives. So when we're talking about research objectives, these research objectives tend to be solutions to the identified business research problem or academic research problem. Now, research objectives are usually presented in a diagrammatic form when we express them in terms of a conceptual framework. Um, Now, this implies that there should be alignment between the way you have expressed your research objectives and how your conceptual framework actually appears, right? Because the conceptual framework usually shows how the variables in the research objectives are connected to the dependent variable of interest. And these research objectives tend to form the relevance for the study, meaning the research objectives are basically components of the study that form the significance of the study. So the significance of the study basically comprises of information that is relevant to particular stakeholders. Now, stakeholders are those kinds of people or organizations that are interested in certain information that might be derived from the findings of the study. So if you're doing a research that is focused on a particular organization, probably organizations of a similar nature will be interested in the results because they may use them to actually also improve their operations if those results are meant to improve organization operations. However, if those results are meant to bring about information that can influence the way government is working, then the stakeholder of that particular research is government, right? If it's a bank, then that you're looking at and how you can improve its operations, then the results will actually be of relevance to other commercial banks as well as the central bank, because the central bank actually regulates the operation of these commercial banks in Zambia. Okay, so meaning that when you achieve these objectives, then you'll be able to arrive at information that can be used by different stakeholders. And that is why we are saying research objectives are directly connected to the significance of the study. If you can't achieve these objectives, then the study cannot be considered important, because it means that study cannot derive information that can be used by the targeted stakeholders for the research. So, on the other hand, we are saying that research objectives are very much connected to the conceptual framework, meaning a conceptual framework just shows us in a diagram form how the variables expressed in the research objectives are connected. And this conceptual framework is also connected to how your study is going to actually contribute to literature or account for things that were not accounted for by other researchers. Meaning, the conceptual framework can also tell us how you are going to fill the gap in the literature, right? Because it comprises of variables that you're going to use and how they are connected to a particular dependent variable. So a conceptual framework comprises of dependent variables and independent variables. If you have one dependent variable, then, well, we're talking of one dependent variable and two or more independent variables, and how they are connected, whether they're expected to be positively related based on some theory. You can also show that, or whether they are actually based on certain research hypotheses. You can also show that in the conceptual framework, and through that we're also able to see, based on other variables that you have included in this conceptual framework, how they are going to actually account for information that has not been captured by other studies. Okay, so I think it must be clear with regards to what has been talked about based on the overview of business research. And now we'll be moving on to the other part of this session. Okay, so the next part of this session is basically the business research structure. So the business research structure, based on some basic academic business research paper, comprises of chapter 1, which is basically the background of the study, and chapter 2, which is the literature review, and chapter 3, which is basically research methodology, and chapter 4, which is data analysis, and chapter 5, which provides the conclusions and recommendations. So to break down these chapters a little bit, so basically the background to the study comprises of the background or comprehensive information pertaining to the background of the study that you're looking at. So it basically gives us some historical information with regards to the independent and dependent variables that you're looking at. If you're looking at an organization, obviously you will see information pertaining to how that organization was formed, its objectives, and whether it's achieving those objectives or not. That's if you're dealing with a case study. And then if under the same background of the study, we also talk of the statement of the research problem, which we have already covered in the previous slide. And we also talk of the general aim of the study, which is basically an expression of the main goal of the research in one particular statement. And then we also have specific objectives that are basically a breakdown of how the study is going to achieve that overall goal of the study based on certain variables that the study is going to use. And then we have either research questions or research hypotheses, depending on the nature of how the study is proposed that it will be done. And then on the other hand, we have the significance of the study, which basically tells us who are the stakeholders of the findings in this study. And we've already covered that part. And obviously, there is another part where we talk about the scope of the study, and that just tells us the extent to which the study will be analyzed, where exactly would it be done, what variables will be involved, for which period of time is the study actually scheduled for. So yeah, so that kind of information is very important. And then we can move on to chapter 2, where we talk about the literature review. So basically, a breakdown of the literature review just involves two major parts. That's the empirical literature as well as the theoretical literature, right? So the theoretical literature, as earlier explained, is just information that tells us about the theories that are in alignment with the variables of interest that we're looking at, mainly the dependent variable and the independent variables described by the conceptual framework, which is linked to the research topic that you are dealing with. And then the empirical literature just involves a review of studies of a similar nature that have been done by other researchers around the world, what they found, the methods they used, and the conclusions they arrived at, and perhaps the variables that they actually just used, so that you can have an idea of the kind of variables you may consider in your research topic, as well as maybe the variables that you may not consider for some reasons based on other studies and what they found, and maybe new variables that you can include in your methodology. So that's the whole purpose of actually reviewing the empirical literature, because it is through the empirical literature review that we're able to identify where the gap in literature actually is. So the literature review also actually has a component of a gap in literature, where you can actually tell us where you found the gap, which particular researchers focused on specific things that you feel you can improve based on your research methodology, or maybe which researchers overlooked certain things, or overall, what did all the researchers actually overlook that you feel you are capable of including and accounting for in your new methodology. And then when it comes to now the chapter 3, that's where we introduce our research methodology, and our research methodology just gives us an overview of the information that is describing how we are going to actually conduct the research. So basically, the most important information under research methodology is the research design. So research design actually tells us how your research has been structured, and this involves talking about whether you're going to use a longitudinal research design or a cross-sectional research design. So basically, when we talk of a longitudinal research design, we're just talking of a research design that involves collecting, say, data from different periods of time, say maybe from 1990 all the way to, say, 2020. So that's a longitudinal in the sense that you are looking at a series of data collected at different points in time. But if you're looking at cross-sectional research designs, are these kinds of designs that involve data that was collected at a particular point in time, say maybe in just 2013, or in 2002, or in 2020. So data that was collected at that time, and means that it is only data that will only give us explanations based on that particular point in time. But the advantage of longitudinal research designs over cross-sectional research designs is that longitudinal research designs are able to show us how we can explain variables of interest over time, right? But for cross-sectional research designs, we're only able to explain variables of interest at a particular point in time. But the limitation to that is that the reality is that things change. So cross-sectional research designs may not account for changes in data over time. All right, so the other part is basically the research approach, which comprises of issues to do with whether you are going to take a quantitative approach or a qualitative approach or a mixed approach, which involves both qualitative approach and quantitative approach. And what do we mean? We are just talking of how we're going to measure variables or the kinds of data that we are going to use. Is it data that is quantifiable, or is it data that cannot be quantified? It is data that is based on opinions, ideas that needs to be expressed in a way that is not quantifiable. So that's basically qualitative approaches. But you can combine the two and come up with a study where you have both quantifiable data and non-quantifiable data. All right, so the other part is basically the target population under research methodology, which gives us an idea of who you are targeting to actually incorporate in the study as a participant. So are you targeting organizations or are you targeting individuals, right? So if it's a case study, you may be targeting a particular entity, which is just one organization, or a particular group of people. So now when we say targeted population, we're interested in the actual size of those organizations or people that you are targeting. So that population size is what will give you an idea of the sample size you can use to actually arrive at a potential pool of respondents from which you can derive information that can be used for data analysis. So when we talk of the targeted population, it is the targeted population that allows us to calculate our sample size, which becomes the estimate based on that targeted population. So under our methodology, we also have a sample size, which is basically calculated using different kinds of formulas, but one of the most commonly used formulas is the Yamein formula, right? But I mean, how we decide whether to use these formulas or not is also dependent on our sampling techniques. So these sampling techniques can vary from one study to another depending on arguments on how we want to arrive at participants in the study, or maybe the kind of research that we are doing. So sometimes some people may not use a formula if they're using purposive sampling techniques, but what is important is to provide a statement to support why you have chosen that particular way of doing things in the methodology. And then we also have the data collection instruments under our research methodology, which is basically a section that describes how we are going to collect data. Are we going to use questionnaires? Are we going to just download secondary data from different data sources, say like World Bank, global economy, or trading economics, or any statistical? We can download data from different platforms on the internet. So basically that process of downloading data from different internet platforms is basically sourcing for secondary data. So on the other hand, primary data is where we actually just get data ourselves by using maybe questionnaires. We go in the field, we collect data, and yeah, that's basically that. And then the other part is basically ethical considerations, where we consider certain principles that we need to follow in order to ensure that we collect data, say, in a manner that is convenient for people, and also in a way that does not harm others. So as a researcher, you do not want to start fighting with potential participants in the field. You want to follow the rules. For example, if you're a university student, you can't just go in the field and start collecting data. You have to seek permission from your university, and also maybe get an ethical clearance form that actually provides evidence that you have been given the rights to go and collect data from different organizations. So those are ethical considerations in research. And also, it is also important not just to get permission from a university, you also seek for permission from the actual organizations that you'll be visiting. Say maybe from management, you get permission from there if you can actually collect data from employees at that particular organization. So same applies if you're doing research for business purposes. Obviously, you have to get permission from your employer to have an ability to conduct research, as well as whoever you'll be going to get data from. You must find ways to actually go ask for permission from them. So the other part is basically data analysis. Okay. And the data analysis, well, I think I missed one thing. Under research methodology, we also consider the data analysis technique, which actually just tells us the kinds of data analysis techniques that you're going to use. Are you going to run a regression? Are you going to do cross tabulations? Are you going to do descriptive statistics? Are you going to do correlations? So that kind of information is also important under your methodology. And then the other part is obviously the data analysis software, where you have to declare the kind of software that you're going to use to conduct all those data analysis techniques that you have actually mentioned. Are you also going to use Excel at some point? So that kind of information is always important. Yeah, so the other part is data analysis. And data analysis just comprises of a part where you talk about demographic analysis. You're basically talking about characteristics of the participants that were involved in the study. And this involves just presenting information with regards to, say, the marital status, the age, as well as maybe their economic status with regards to maybe their income status, employment status, and so on and so forth. However, this kind of information, unless otherwise, usually does not contribute to achieving the research objectives. So unless you are basically dealing with research objectives that require understanding demographic characteristics of participants, then they would contribute to actually achieving the research objectives. And then the other section is where you actually present how you actually analyzed the information based on the actual information you had given under data analysis techniques. And then it also involves a section where you present discussions of the findings, and this section just involves relating your findings to what others had found in the empirical literature that you had reviewed. And then when we talk of the last chapter 5, which involves conclusions and recommendations, so the conclusions are basically you trying to come up with an analysis based on what you have found, and you come up with your own opinions, how you can express I mean how you can interpret what the results that you have found, and also maybe link it to theory and come up with information that actually concludes the relationships that you have found with reference to the objectives that you had outlined that you have to achieve. So under conclusions, we're interested in knowing whether the objectives have been achieved, and if they have been achieved, how have they been achieved? I mean, what kind of information in the data analysis shows that we have actually achieved the objectives that we had stated in our chapter 1. So when we are writing our conclusions, we want to link them to the objectives that we had stated in chapter 1 and show exactly what we have found and what we can say about the results that we have obtained. And then recommendations, we want to now arrive at what can we recommend based on the results that we have obtained with respect to the objectives that we had outlined in our chapter 1. So these recommendations usually have to be written with consideration that they are meant to be implemented by certain stakeholders that are mentioned, say maybe in the significance of the study. So meaning the recommendations are written depending on the kind of organizations that the research was targeting, that the information that will be derived from this research will be of value to these kinds of people, organizations, or maybe government. So if in the significance of the study we mentioned that the information will be of value to government and certain types of people as well as organizations, then as we recommend, we have to ensure that we link our recommendations to those particular stakeholders, because it does not make sense to come up with recommendations that are targeted to be implemented by people that are not interested in reading whatever was being written in this particular research. All right, so moving on to the next slide, we want to discuss how case study research topics can be phrased. So, for example, we have the first one, the effect of strategic planning on organization performance, a case study of ZRA. So, ZRA just stands for Zambia Revenue Authority. It's basically a government institution in Zambia. And then we have a second research title, which is just the effect of performance appraisals on employee performance, a case study of Newman Microfinance Institution. So this Newman Microfinance Institution is one particular entity that we are trying to focus on with regards to the second research topic. And then we have the third topic, which is basically an examination of the effectiveness of internal auditors on the misuse of public funds, a case study of the Ministry of Education in Zambia. So the Ministry of Education is one particular organization that we're trying to focus on in this particular research topic. And then the third one is basically the effect of COVID-19 government restrictions on business operations in the manufacturing sector, a case study of Zambia Development Agency. So looking at these topics, basically you notice that each of these topics are focused on a particular organization, and that's what makes them a case study. So we move on to the other one. Okay, so the other one is basically looking at how we can phrase our general studies. So we are trying to distinguish between case studies and general studies. So the first one, with regards to how general studies should be phrased, is as follows: the effect of credit risk management strategies on the reduction of non-performing loans, evidence from selected microfinance institutions in Zambia. So we have not specified any microfinance institution. However, we're saying we're going to randomly select some microfinance institutions in Zambia, right? So that makes it general because we're looking at the microfinance sector, but obviously we'll incorporate different kinds of microfinance institutions. And these different microfinance institutions may be specialized in providing microfinance to specific kinds of clients that may vary from one microfinance institution to another with regards to whatever sector those clients could be in or the types of clients they could be. So because of that, this kind of research topic is general, right? Because it's looking at different kinds of microfinance institutions. And then we have the second one, an investigation into factors affecting accessibility to financial services, evidence from selected commercial banks in Zambia. So for this one, it's also a general study because we have not specified any commercial bank. We want to just focus on different kinds of commercial banks in Zambia. So the third one, an empirical analysis of the effect of mobile money services on entrepreneurship in Zambia. Evidence from SMEs in Lusaka district. So this one, we have also not specified a particular SME. There are different kinds of SMEs in Lusaka district specialized in different business activities, and because of that, it's not a case study, it's general in that we are dealing with SMEs doing different kinds of business related tasks in Zambia. And then we have the fourth one, which is basically an assessment of the effectiveness of external auditors on transparency and accuracy of financial statements, evidence from public sector organizations. So well, this one is also very general because it is not specifying exactly the kinds of public sector organizations we're going to approach. However, it is giving us a general perspective that our main focus in this study are public sector organizations that are obviously um, uh, uh, run by government, and therefore we want to assess how external auditors affect their transparency and accuracy with regards to their financial statements. So this one is also a general study. All right, so next we want to talk about background of the study. So this is under chapter 1 of a business research report or proposal. So basically, when we talk of the background and we say we are dealing with a general study, one of the things that we need to consider under our background of the study is background information on the sector of focus or area of study, right? Problems facing the sector of focus and their relation to the welfare of society or nation as a whole. Current affairs in relation to the sector or area of study, relation of the state of affairs in the sector or area of study to contemporary theories pertaining to the research topic, objectives of the nation or society, and their relation to the performance or state of affairs in the sector or area of study. So basically, the major difference here with regards to a case study, when we compare a general study and a case study, their backgrounds should differ. The kind of information you put in a background of study that is general should differ from the kind of information that you include in the background of the study for a case study. So for example, here in the general study, you'll notice that we're focusing on sectors, and whatever problems we'll be talking about them as problems that are facing the sector, not an organization, not a particular organization, right? But the sector as a whole in which that organization may belong. So That's the major difference when we are looking at it from a general perspective rather than a case study perspective. On the other hand, our argument for the relevance of the study lies in linking the consequences of not addressing the issues that the research intends to address by its propensity or likelihood to affect the nation as a whole or society. That is why, under the background of the study, we are interested in objectives of the nation or society and their relation to the performance or state of affairs in the sector or area of study. For example, if the agriculture sector is not performing well, then obviously a country like Zambia that seems to have a huge labor force incorporated in the agriculture sector will be worried, because it means that it is probably one of the sectors with potential to contribute to GDP, and therefore we'll be talking about the sector, the problems that the sector is facing, and trying to link the problems that it's facing to possible consequences which may result if we do not address the issues that we're talking about in the background of the study. So that is generalizing things, because we are not basically talking about specific farmers in the agriculture sector not doing fine, but rather we are talking about the agriculture sector in aggregate or in general as a sector that is not performing well. So if we move to a case study, we are expected to include information in the background such as company, targeted group or entities background. We are also expected to include information such as problems facing the company, targeted group or entity, current affairs in relation to the company, targeted group or entity's background, relation of the state of affairs to contemporary theories pertaining to the research topic, objectives of the firm or targeted group and their current state subject to the firm's targeted group's performance. So, also here, what we are interested in is looking at how this case study background information should differ from a general study background information. So if you see here, when we're looking at it from a case study perspective, our main focus is a particular company's information, right, or a targeted group's information, and the problems that this particular company is facing or particular group of people are facing. For example, if you're looking at a targeted group of people, you may be looking at people who are enrolled in a particular program. For example, maybe you're looking at people who are involved in village banking. So you want to find out what kind of problems are they facing. So you're doing a case study of village bankers, right? Or people involved in village banking, and maybe trying to assess whether it leads to positive gains with regards to income or not. So that could be a case study of interest. On the other hand, looking at current affairs, so as you have seen, I have emphasized so much on current affairs in that you want to understand what is currently happening before you actually start proposing theories or information related to what others have done, because you wouldn't want to be repeating what other studies have done. So the main focus is to look at what is currently happening, and that will allow you to actually identify problems that are currently existing. So that involves reading about what is going on with regards to this particular organization or group of people, and finding challenges they are facing and maybe converting those challenges to a practical identified problem. Now, the other part, we want to relate the state of affairs to contemporary theories. So, meaning if people are, say, involved in this particular village banking activity, but seems like majority of those involved in that particular activity are not improving with regards to their income generation, then we may say that in theory it is expected that if someone is involved with these village banking activities, their income is like should improve. However, the current state of affairs seems that those that are involved in village banking do not seem to be improving with regards to their wealth. There has been maybe a lot of reports suggesting that most people involved in village banking are losing their income, or they are not making any progress. They seem to be not enjoying any benefits in the program and things like that. So those things can form a practical problem that is showing that there is inconsistency with regards to the theory that village banking has capacity to increase an individual's income, especially for the poor. Okay, so on the other hand, we want to link objectives of the firm or targeted group and their current state subject to the firm's performance. So for example, if you're doing a case study, you're interested in how, say, maybe a company's financial performance has been, and you want to link whatever objectives of that study to solve a solution to maybe the financial performance itself. All right, so that's what we talk about when we are dealing with a case study. So all this information will be talked about in detail in the next session or lesson that we're going to have. However, we proceed from there. Now, we want to talk about the statement of the research problem. Most of the issues that will be talked about here have already been talked about in the previous slides, so it will be a quick running through of information that we have already talked about. So when we're looking at a general study, there are three dimensions in which we can look at the problem that we want to solve. So the first thing that you see is that there is what we call a practical problem, and we also have a theoretical problem and a methodological problem. So when we are explaining the practical problem under a general study, we are interested in explaining issues of great concern that the sector or area of focus is facing in the nation or globally based on current affairs or up-to-date information. When we're looking at it from a theoretical problem perspective, we want to explain the current relationship between the dependent and independent variables in the study based on current affairs or up-to-date information. We also want to relate the current relationship between the dependent and independent variables to theories in literature. Again, we want to determine inconsistencies between theory and practice or reality of state of current affairs based on the variables of interest. Furthermore, we want to also explain the possible negative consequences on society or the nation which may arise if the state of current affairs were left without any intervention to correct or change them. Then when we are talking about the methodological problem that we have identified, we want to explain what other studies have done or have not managed to do with regards to their methodology, and how your research is likely to account for what or whatever they have not managed to do, or rather your research what it intends to fill in the literature that exists pertaining to the research topic that you are doing. So in terms of a case study, the practical problem is aimed at explaining reality of issues of great importance that the company, group, or focus or entity is currently facing. The theoretical problem is aimed at explaining the same things that we have explained for the general study. So the major difference between information in a case study with regards to the problem compared to that of a general study is that for a case study, we are just focusing on a particular company or group of focus or entity. So otherwise, every information talked about in the general study is the same, except that it has been narrowed down for a case study to a particular organization or group of people. All right, so the other one is the significance of the study, and under significance of the study, we are just interested in for both a general and a case study, we're interested in explaining the significance of the study to relevant stakeholders such as countries with similar sectors or problems, the government, companies, or people operating in the same sector or area of focus. Significance to empirical literature or wide body of knowledge. We are interested in explaining how your research will contribute to the wide body of knowledge in empirical literature. How will your results add value to what is already available or explained by plethora of research in empirical studies? How will it account for what other studies could not account for? And how will it fill an unidentified gap in the literature? Right, so basically this is information that can be given to you in the first lesson, and hopefully we'll meet in the second lesson that is going to cover a lot of information that may have not been covered in this lesson, and some of it that has not been explained in detail in this particular lesson. All right, thank you very much. Now we come to an end of this lesson. Hope to meet you in the next lesson. However, this lesson was given to you for free. In the next lesson, you need to enroll for this particular course, and you need to actually check out the full course, and the full course is actually being given out to you at a particular price. So you try to seek that information that we'll put in the description in order for you to have access to that particular course, given that you're interested in learning how to become an expert in research, understanding how research can be done, and become better at analyzing issues with regards to research. So just make sure that you enroll for the course. All right, thank you. See you next time.